Hi there. Welcome to the Complicated Kids podcast. I'm your host, Gabriele Nicolet. I am a toddler whisperer, a speech therapist, and a parent coach. And it's just me around here today because today is my 155th episode. And if we're being honest, I had planned to have something in the can for 150, and that didn't happen. So here we are. 155 seems, kind of a round number. Got those double fives. And this is kind of again, it's a solo episode where I am going to be talking a little bit about some of the threads that we talk about on this podcast. And I'll allude to certain episodes that have impacted me, perhaps, but I really want to speak to the underlying concepts and ideas that I hope flow through this podcast. And if you're a listener, regular listener, thank you. Leave a, subscribe and leave a comment, and I'll do all those things that we tell people to do. So this will not be unfamiliar to you, but if this is the first time you're tuning in, welcome, first of all. And for some of you, it'll just be like a nice little refresh. So it's been coming up a lot in the interactions I've been having lately, which is I hope that in every episode, what I am reinforcing is, yes, parenting a child who is complicated and sometimes difficult and challenging. And they are their own human who will grow and change and develop in the way that they're meant to develop. And I think the starting point for all of my work, including this podcast, is the idea that children are sovereign beings that we get to have in our house for a little bit of time, maybe more than you would like if you're raising a young adult who's still at home. Maybe not as much time as we would like. And so, again, whatever that time frame looks like, it's temporary, right? The whole point of parenting any child is that they will grow. Some of them will never leave. Some of your children will never leave your house, and that is also its own journey. And so if that's the case, I want to really encourage you to go and listen to the episode with Mady Tannum Carney, who does all kinds of planning events, not events, but like planning activities around children who are going to need care for the rest of their lives. That was a really great episode. And it's not a, her work falls kind of on the outside of where this podcast usually lands in terms of who we're talking about. And yet I know that for parts of this community, that's a really important thing to know. So Mady Tannum Carney. And if I were really good, I'd put the episode number. I'm going to ask my assistant to put those in the show notes. So you'll look for them there. Okay. Most children, for the vast majority of children, the goal is going to be to have them move out of our houses into something else, whether that's assisted living with a caregiver, whether that's their own situation with roommates, without roommates, with a family member, without a family member. And we kind of get lost in the weeds. And for those of you who have little kids, we forget that that's the goal. We think it's all about the shoes in the bin and the backpack on the hook and whether they got a good grade at school. That is not what it's about. It's not what it's about. And I recognize, because I have done it also, that's how it feels some days. And so if you're listening to this on a day that feels like it's about backpacks and shoes and whether or not they got to school on time, just take a breath and just remind yourself today is never going to happen again, this particular day. And you will have distance from this day the longer you live. When my kids were really little, I used to tell myself that a lot when I would have a hard day. And I would remind myself at bedtime, I would say, there's never going to be another day. That is today. Today is finished. There'll be something else tomorrow, and that's fine. I think another really pivotal podcast that keeps in mind, that centers this idea that we're sending children out into the world to be their own humans and to develop, is the interview with Martha Adler about death and dying. If you haven't listened to that, please do. A friend of mine died not so long ago, and there are not a lot of young children in that. There aren't any young children in that scenario. Her sons are older, but that episode on death and dying is very important, I think. And so and it's important not just because of what we should say to kids who are experiencing death, and that includes, by the way, death of a pet, death of a grandparent, death of a friend, either an adult friend of yours or a friend of theirs, God forbid, right? It's not just about the tactics. It's about how we understand the child who is in front of us, and how we understand children in general, which, again, I'll go back to what I said earlier, is that they're their own thing. They're their own human. Even though they came out of you, even though they live in your house, even though they eat your food and suck you dry financially, right? They are their own human. And so much of what we get caught up with, so much of the work that I do in my parent coaching practice, is about untangling that, about untangling the notion that I, as the parent, am not actually in control of my child's life. We have influence, but not control. And I know for a fact there's a podcast by that name, and I don't remember the guest. So again, I'm going to link to it in the show notes. You should definitely go listen to that one. And that brings up another podcast episode that I would love for you guys to listen to, which is one of the podcasts with Penny Williams, who is quite wise and knows a lot about this work. We recorded a podcast called Circumstances Are Neutral. And I believe it was during the storms in North Carolina, where there was a ton of destruction and devastation happening. And even then, circumstances are neutral. In other words, the things that happen in the world, the things that happen around us, war, politics, disagreements, whether children get good or bad grades, all of those things are circumstances, and those are neutral. And again, one of the big pieces of work in parent coaching that I do is helping parents see that, and really understand what that means. Because when we understand that whatever's happening in the world, whatever's happening around us, is a neutral thing until we have a thought about it, then we get some control over ourselves. I'm even hesitating to use the word control, but we do get control over ourselves and our brains. And we get to be very conscious about what we think about things. If we are filling up our heads with a bunch of garbage thoughts, and I did just say garbage thoughts, that our kid can't handle themselves, that they're a victim, that they are, that the way they're doing things is wrong, and if they would just fill in the blank, I could just fill in the blank. Usually that's, if they would just perform, I could relax. If they would just learn this thing, then I could stop pushing. When we realize that all of that is self-created in our minds, then the game changes. Because then what happens when we become aware of that, then we realize, oh, I don't have to think those things. Those things are garbage. I don't like garbage. I don't want to eat garbage every day. then we start to feed our brains something more nutritious. And it turns out those more nutritious thoughts, more positive thoughts, if you want to call them that, and it's not just about positivity. We're not talking toxic positivity here, but though that spiral, that becomes a virtuous cycle instead of a vicious cycle. And it turns out kids do a lot better. It's a byproduct, not a direct effect. But when we start feeling better about our kids, they start doing better. Whether or not, and this is the kicker, whether or not their behavior actually changes. And this brings me to behavior. Yay, we got to behavior. Always remember that behavior is a signal. It's not the root. Behavior is communication about what's happening. It's an external signal of what's happening internal to the child. This is true of all humans. Our outward behavior indicates what's happening internally, right? Now, adults are slightly better at masking, at not acting out their thoughts and feelings onto other people. 3-year-olds and people with ADHD and impulse control issues. I don't like the way I said that. People with ADHD who maybe have a hard time controlling their impulses may not be able to inhibit their actions, right? That means that their internal landscape is being reflected externally in the form of behavior. Okay. So, when we're talking about behavior, remember, we want to be very, very intentional and curious about why this behavior is happening. And I'm sure I have an episode on behavior somewhere in there, many, many, many. And I will link to one of those in the show notes. But if you're struggling with your child's behaviors, if you're like, they won't get up, they won't do their homework, they won't apply for the job, they won't put their shoes on, they won't go to school, they won't. You're looking at behavior. Remember that that's a reflection of what's happening internally. And so if the outward behavior is disorderly and incoherent, guess what? So is the inside. And isn't that interesting? And doesn't that make you a little bit more compassionate? It does me. So hopefully it does you as well. Guys, there's a lot in 155 episodes. I really would like for you to share, what was your favorite episode? Will you send it to a friend? Will you share it on social media? I don't know how to do half of that stuff, you guys, but I'm happy that you're listening. Thank you. I love hearing from you. It's very validating when I hear, as I did from a client earlier today, that, something that a guest says on the podcast or something that I say on the podcast resonates, and that they're going to use it. That is like my favorite thing in the world. So it's not why I do the podcast, but it's very reinforcing to hear. The reason I do the podcast is because I want people to have a safe place to get information where they're going to feel heard, and they're going to be able to get some usable stuff that they can take back to their lives. So hopefully you found that here. Thank you again for listening, and I'll have a guest the next episode. Take care. Bye-bye.